y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to tell you about the details of my trip to Iceland in case anyone wants to visit the places I did and hike the Laugavegur Trail and or the extension into Skogar. I'm going to start with some of the details of the Laugavegur Trail and what I call the F Trail because I can't pronounce the name of that trail and I'm not going to just completely slaughter it. But keep in mind, there are timestamps in the video description if you want to skip ahead to a different section at any point. The Laugavegur Trail has been claimed to be one of the best hikes in the world. It spans 34 miles from Landmannalaugar, which is basically a hut in the middle of nowhere, to Thorsmork, which is also pretty much a hut in the middle of nowhere. The terrain of the Laugavegur Trail is not brutal, it's pretty cruisy. There are some steep climbs, but the views around you keep you occupied, or at least they did me, and I am not a big fan of uphills. There's nothing super scary or technical and really difficult. I will say the trail is very exposed though, so whatever Mother Nature feels like dishing out, you're gonna get all of it. So if it's sunshine, so be it, but if it's rain and wind, you should definitely be prepared for those things. Also, even in the midst of summer, Iceland can experience whiteout conditions and snow. It did actually snow on me a little bit while I was out on trail, nothing serious, but there have been people who have died up on the Laugavegur Trail just from whiteout conditions and they lost their way. Strangely, I never did see any lightning or hear any thunder when I was in Iceland. I would approach some climbs and see black clouds and I'd go back to Colorado in my mind where that's just the perfect recipe for getting struck by lightning and potentially never hiking again. But in Iceland, it just didn't seem like that vibe existed there. So I'm just curious if any of y'all have ever heard thunder or seen lightning in Iceland. Let me know in the comments because I was just surprised with all the rain we had. I didn't experience any of that. Another challenging aspect of the Laugavegur Trail is there are some water crossings. I never had anything that was as deep as waist deep, but there were certainly some crossings that were more intense than others, but nothing that I felt like I couldn't get through. One of the things that I liked about the Laugavegur Trail is you don't have to make reservations for camping, but on the flip side, one of the things that I didn't love is you do have to camp at certain spots. There are 6 huts directly on trail, starting at the hut at Landmannalaugar and ending at the hut in Thorsmork. Honestly, I would probably choose to camp at the huts anyway. It's kind of like the huts, I guess, along the Appalachian Trail in the White Mountains, for those of y'all who are familiar with those. But there is a warden at each of the huts that kind of mans it, and they take your money. You have to pay to camp at the huts, and again, you are required to camp at the hut, so there's no wild camping. But it works out nicely because you've got some sort of toilet, whether it's a flushing toilet or a pit toilet. They've got some minimal snacks for sale. There's usually a picnic table or some common area that you can cook, and you could actually make a reservation to stay at the huts if you wanted to do that, but they do book up pretty quickly, so it's recommended that you make those plans way ahead of time if you're actually wanting to sleep in the hut. I did have a warden tell me that sometimes people will cancel or somebody won't show up, so if you're wanting to stay in a hut for the night and escape some weather, then you can always inquire about that. It's not just far-fetched that there might be an opening. The cost of camping for each of the huts, at least when I was there, was 2,000 krona, or ISK is how you'll see their currency denoted. From what I've heard, the huts aren't super cheap, but when you're wanting to escape some gnarly weather, it's probably worth it to a lot of folks. Some of the huts also offer tent rentals. They'll have like these really fancy tents that have what I call like a porch or patio area where you can store your gear, and then like a nice thick tumbling mat kind of pad on the inside of the tent. I ended up renting one of these and it cost me 5,000 krona. Normally it's 7,500 krona, but because the tent had recently been damaged in the windstorm that I experienced the first night, they gave it to me for a discount because we kind of had to rig it up with some duct tape. I think it would be really nice to not have the weight of a shelter and be able to make reservations to stay at a hut or one of those tents. But also, Iceland can be so volatile with their weather that it's not a bad idea to have some sort of shelter in case you've got to throw it up because of some emergency situation, you can't find your way to the hut, and you really just need to take shelter where you are. So I did find some comfort and peace of mind having my own shelter on me and being self-reliant. I'll put a link in the video description where you can inquire about reserving huts if you're interested in that, and pretty much anything that I talk about information wise I'm going to put a link to in the video description so you can read more about it, learn more about it, etc. Now let's talk about one of a hiker's favorite topics, and that is food. There are some snacks, as I mentioned, sold at each of these huts, but I wouldn't rely on that. Typically it's very minimalistic. They might have a few candy bars or maybe a bag of chips or something like that. So you really need to plan to bring all of your own food that you'd need on trail, just like any other backpacking trip. Now, with that said, at Laugavegur, the first hut, they have this bus that's transformed into a little store, and they call it the Mountain Mall. The Mountain Mall had the most extensive selection of snacks and stuff that I saw on trail. They've got different food items. I believe they had some sandwiches and stuff. All sorts of little knickknacks that you might need to go backpacking. But again, I would make that a last resort. If you forget something or something gets left behind, I wouldn't rely on that, because there could be a potential for them having a shortage for whatever reason, and then you're in trouble. Plus, I imagine things are probably a little bit more expensive there at the Mountain Mall than they would be in town or back home, where you could plan and just get what you want before you go. There is also a restaurant at the hut that I stayed at the second night, and that was just like a diamond in the rough. It was really nice to get there and to eat a hot meal that I didn't have to prepare. Also, the little tiny building that the restaurant is in was heated, so it was a nice escape from the cold weather and the dampness. And also, that was a really nice opportunity for some socialization. When you're freezing cold and you're outside in the dampness and you're having to hurry up and cook so you can rush and get in your sleeping bag, people aren't generally in the friendliest moods as compared to being out of the elements and in the warmth where you just can kind of relax and hang out. The food definitely wasn't cheap, but there's a price to convenience, and to me it was worth it. So I took full advantage and made sure I had dinner the night that I arrived at that hut, and then the next day I had lunch before I left. I would have had breakfast too, but unfortunately they don't serve breakfast. There's also a restaurant down about a mile or so side trail. It's in Thorsmork, but it's not the end of the Laugavegur trail, Thorsmork, where there's a hut there. It's kind of off to the side before you get to the final hut, which marks the end of the Laugavegur trail. If you look in the All Trails app, you can see where to kind of turn off, and there's also signage on the trail. But you'll hear it referred to as the volcano huts. I guess they're actually called the Katla Mountain Huts. They've got a couple of huts there, a thermal pool, a sauna, a restaurant. They also have liquor and other alcohol options, and showers. When I got there, I inquired about getting a bunk so that I could recharge my electronics. You know, I'd have an outlet and everything. And thankfully they did have an opening, and I think it ended up costing me around $50 to $55 for the bunk for the night. You can also camp there if you want to, and they also have these glamping tent options for rent. All of the huts along the Laugavegur trail have water, so I never had to collect water out of a stream. I just would fill up at a hut, and if I passed another hut, I could get some more water. But certainly it's not a bad idea to have a Sawyer squeeze or some water treatment just in case you do need it. I carried my Sawyer squeeze, and I would carry it again if I were to go back out there. But some of the huts also have hot showers available. It's for an extra charge. I believe it was 500 krona, which is less than $5 US dollars. Also, a word on carrying water. I normally like to carry 2 1-liter Smart Water bottles, but I didn't find the Smart Water brand in Iceland. I actually couldn't even find a 1-liter bottle of water, but I did find half-liter bottles of seltzer water, so I just used 4 of those instead. Something I loved about this trail in particular and the hut system is they don't close early. The warden's offices and that restaurant, the first restaurant I talked about, were open until 10 p.m. I think the restaurant might have even been open until 11 p.m. But this made things so much less stressful for somebody who is not a morning person. I didn't have to rush out at the butt crack of dawn trying to race everybody to get a good camping spot. I mean, I was always the last one to leave camp still, but there is plenty of room for camping outside of the huts. You're not really, stuck with a bad spot or anything like that. If you get there late, it doesn't get dark until late, so you're not racing the sun. And then again, the warden's offices don't close until late. So I don't know. It was just really nice to finally see a trail and a system that worked with my schedule. So how long does it take to do the Laugavegur Trail? Well, that really depends on you and your personal preference. That's like, how long does it take to do any trail? It really is up to your physical abilities and just how much time you want to spend in one spot. For myself, I took 4 days and I camped 3 nights on the Laugavegur Trail, but I probably would have wanted to spend a little bit more time out there if it hadn't been for the weather being so bad. The first hut in Landmannalaugar has apparently a thermal pool somewhere nearby. I didn't go scope that out because it was so cold and miserable that I really didn't want to put on my bathing suit and get in water and then have to get out of it and be freezing. So I carried a bathing suit the whole trail for nothing really. But even with my 4 days and 3 nights, I didn't feel rushed at all. It was really a nice amount because I wasn't having to carry too much weight and food, but also I wasn't having to really feel like I was pushing myself to do so many miles per day. But if I were to just be staying in the huts and I felt pretty confident in not carrying a shelter and I didn't have that extra weight, then adding on another day or 2 of weight and food, I don't know, it would probably be worth it just to be able to spend some more time out there because it is so beautiful. And if the weather had been nicer, I probably would have wanted to sit down and take a lot more breaks and just really soak it in. Most people hike this trail from north to south, and that means from Landmannalaugar to Thorsmork, but you can certainly do it the other way. It's not like it's a one-way trail or anything, but it is said to be more difficult going from Thorsmork to Landmannalaugar just with the layout and the land of everything. So if you're gonna go that route, then it's suggested that you expect your trip to take longer than if you go from north to south. July and August are really the best months for being out there because they're the warmest, and after August, pretty much everything kind of shuts down. In June, you can go out there, but sometimes some of the huts aren't open until the end of the month. And in June, you're gonna have a lot more snow and you might end up in a situation where you need crampons. So if you don't wanna worry about that, you don't wanna worry about colder temperatures, and you want everything to be all the way open and operating, then I would go in July and August. I went at the beginning of August, and if I had to do it again, I would probably go in the end of July or so, just because I feel like it would be a little bit warmer. During the time I was there, the days I saw temperatures at most probably in the mid-50s, and then in the nights, the coldest temperatures I saw were lower 30s. But it stayed wet most of the time and pretty much windy, all except for maybe the last day or something. For navigation, I used the All Trails app. I already have a subscription to All Trails, so I just downloaded the Laugavegur Trail track in that app. And with the subscription, it'll work without having service, but I would also recommend checking out a guidebook that I found online. You can get it at tmbtent.com. They've got several different guides for various trails, but I like this guide because it goes into a packing list and some general information about the trail. It also has a workout routine to get yourself ready and to train for the trail if you want to do that. One of my favorite things about the guide was They gave example itineraries. Hey, if you're wanting to hike this in 4 days and 3 nights, or shorter than that or longer than that, you know, they just gave some different options, and I found that to be helpful. When you pay for the guide, you also get GPS points that you can drop into the Gaia Maps app. I didn't bother with that just because, like I said, I already had a subscription to All Trails, but if you don't have an All Trails subscription, then I would definitely check out this guide and go with that option. And you can get all of that on their website for $26. With that said, the Laugavegur Trail is pretty well signed and maintained. There were a couple of points where I got a little confused, and it was nice to have my All Trails app, so I would definitely recommend having a way to GPS and navigate through that, especially because what I mentioned before, that you can end up in whiteout conditions and be in some trouble if you lose your way. So those are more or less the details of the Laugavegur Trail. And you could end your trek at the end of the Laugavegur Trail at that last hut there in Thorsmork, or if you want a little bit more adventure, you can do the F Trail. And if you're any kind of a waterfalls person, I definitely recommend that you continue on to Skogar, which is where the F Trail ends. So to continue onto the trail, you walk about a mile or so down a gravel path / road to the beginning of the F Trail, and then the trail leads you 16 miles where it ends at Skogar. The last half of the trail into Skogar has over 20 waterfalls, ending with Skogafoss, which is the last one there at Skogar, and was featured apparently in the first scene of the last season of Game of Thrones. And I didn't realize that until after I had left. That would have been pretty cool to kind of like pull it up and look at it and know that while I was there, but it's still kind of cool that I got to see it. The F Trail looked completely different than the Laugavegur Trail to me. I mean, more or less. It was much more green, and it seemed like there was more life. And I also like that I got to walk on some of the newest ground on Earth, because on the F Trail you go over Magni and Modi, which are some of the newest mountains from an eruption in 2010. Now, I should warn you that all of this beauty and awesomeness does come at a cost, and that is the F Trail is much more rugged and strenuous than the Laugavegur Trail by far. Really, it's the first day that's more strenuous, and it's still nothing crazy, but if you're afraid of heights, there is one particular spot on the F Trail where there is a chain that you have to hold on to because the path is super narrow and gravelly. But I mean, I didn't feel like I was gonna fall and die at those points, but I could see where somebody who has a serious fear of heights could be pretty paralyzed at that spot. But you always have the option of turning around. I definitely recommend at least trying, but the terrain in general is a little bit more brutal than the Laugavegur Trail. You could do this hike in one day if you wanted to. I wouldn't rush it just because it is so beautiful, and some of those spots that are more strenuous, you'll feel like you're rushing and pushing through and might get aggravated and not enjoy it as much if you split it up into 2 days. Same deal on this trail. You're supposed to camp at the huts. There is a hut at the top of the climb that I had planned on camping at, but thankfully they had some vacancies that night, so I was able to actually sleep inside of the hut. One thing about the F Trail with water, you should plan to carry what you need with you, because even though there is a hut at the top, they sometimes have water, but even if they do, a lot of times it's just for the people who are paying to stay in the hut, not the folks who are paying to camp. Fortunately, they had water while I was there, so I just kind of cameled up, but I did tote the water with me that I needed from Thorsmork for the rest of the trip. So what about travel and getting to the trailhead? I took a plane from Atlanta, Georgia, had a layover in Washington, D.C., and from there I flew into Reykjavik, the international airport, which is actually about 45 minutes outside the city of Reykjavik proper. Because the airport isn't right there in town, getting to the town can be a little tricky, but you've got several options. One, there is a company Flybus that you can book a bus from the airport to the town, and that costs 3,499 krona as of today, which is about 25 US dollars. not too shabby. There, the bus will drop you off at a bus station in town, and I guess at that point you could hop on another bus or possibly taxi to wherever you're staying for the night. A taxi is another option to get from the airport to the town, but I've heard that they can be pretty expensive, and I mean, that makes sense for a 45-minute drive. Unfortunately, they don't have Uber or Lyft or anything like that. I checked. Probably the most expensive option, but the one that gives the most flexibility, is renting a car. They've got several car rental companies right there at the airport, and after considering all of my options, I decided to go with the car rental for various reasons, but mainly one being the flexibility. I didn't want to spend a lot of time trying to fine-tune all of the logistics, and if my plans got changed up, you know, kind of being in a tight spot, and by the time you taxi from here to there and there to here, you know, it ends up being kind of a big chunk of money anyway, and I didn't want to waste a lot of time waiting at bus stops. So for the thing that was most efficient and gave me the most flexibility, I went with renting a car. Plus, I kind of wanted to drive in a different country. I like that Iceland, before the light turns green, they give you a yellow light with the red light, so you know, like, hey, get ready to go. I kind of appreciated that. And another interesting thing about driving in Iceland, the rental car companies warn you that gusts of wind are common in Iceland. They've got these little stickers on the door, and they're not responsible if the wind ends up hyperextending the door. So when you open your door, you've got to be prepared for the wind to snatch it, because if there's damage from the door ripping off or blowing open and hyperextending, then that's on you. Since I rented a car, I thought, well, maybe I could drive to the trailhead myself and then get a ride somehow back to the starting point. But you've got to have some serious four-wheel drive to make it to the trailhead. It's a pretty gnarly road to get there, and it's amazing what these big old buses can do in getting there and crossing water and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, I would not want to take a rental car down that road. So what I did is I got the hiker pass. That's what everybody kind of suggested to do on everything I read online. And you can get that through Reykjavik Excursions. Again, I'll put links to this stuff in the video description. But with that hiker pass, it pays for your bus ride to Landmannalaugar, and then they'll pick you up at either Thorsmork or at Skogar, whichever you prefer. So you book with them, and then you email them and let them know the dates that you're wanting to arrive and to depart. The thing that I didn't love about the hiker pass, they advertise that, you know, it's flexible, but the buses fill up, so it's really not super flexible. I actually emailed and tried to change my dates a few days ahead of time, and they were like, sorry, we're booked on that day already, because there was some bad weather coming, so that's why I was trying to kind of push it off a little bit. So what I ended up doing is just dipping out on the bus that was supposed to pick me up at Skogar. It was gonna arrive at like 10 a.m. and I knew that I wasn't gonna hike the second half of the F Trail by 10 a.m. and I didn't want to rush through it. So I looked at other options, and there was a Straight-O bus. It's kind of like the city bus, if you will, even though they travel several hours away to pick people up. But they did departures from there around 2 or 3 p.m. So that gave me more time on the trail. Also, the Reykjavik Excursions bus picks up early, like I said, at 10 a.m. or so, and they don't get back until around 8 p.m. to Reykjavik. Whereas the Straight-O bus picked me up, and I mean, it made stops along the way, but I was back in Reykjavik by, I don't know, I would say 3 or 4 hours after I was picked up in Skogar. So you get more time on trail, you spend less time getting back, and you get back to Reykjavik sooner. So if I were to do it again, and I was gonna go all the way to Skogar especially, then I would just do a one-way bus with Reykjavik Excursions to Landmannalaugar, and then I would take the Straight-O bus from Skogar to Reykjavik for my returning bus. And you don't have to make a reservation with the Straight-O bus. that was something else that I liked. So you just have to know their schedule and when they pick up at Skogar. So that allows you flexibility if you want to spend an extra day on trail. You don't have to stress about not being able to get back. If you're going to leave from Thorsmork though, then maybe the hiker pass does make the most sense to you, but just know it's not flexible. If you miss your scheduled time, then you're gonna have to pay for another ticket if they happen to have an opening to return you to Reykjavik. Just a heads up also, the Reykjavik excursions bus leaves, at least the one I took, I guess there are several different stops, but I left from the BSI bus station in Reykjavik, and when I took the Strætó bus back to Reykjavik, it dropped me off at a different bus station where I then had to get on another bus that went close to the BSI bus station. But there is a little trick of the trade that I'll tell you if you're not familiar with. If you're ever wanting to use public transportation and say you get dropped off at a different bus station and they're like, this is the end of the line, you gotta go, you can punch into your phone where you're trying to go, at least on Apple Maps. I assume Google Maps has something similar, but you punch in where you're trying to go from your current location, and then there's a little button that you can select for public transportation, and it'll give you the time of the bus and the bus line that you need to take to get to where you want to go. So I always find that useful when I end up in situations like that where I'm like, oh, public transportation, the bus schedules are confusing. That has just been helpful for me. One thing I wondered about before my trip to Iceland, do I need to carry cash or can I use a credit card wherever I go? Everywhere that I went to, including the huts on the Laugavegur Trail and the F Trail, they accepted credit card. I like to have cash when I travel because cash is king. I would assume there is an ATM at the airport. I know for sure there is an ATM at the BSI bus station. So if you use Reykjavik excursions to get to Landmannalaugar for your hike of the Laugavegur Trail, wow, that's a mouthful, then you will have the opportunity to use an ATM there. And then of course throughout town, just like here in the US, there are ATMs at different businesses. If you end up with some leftover cash when you get back to the airport to fly home, assuming that you're not coming from Iceland, you can go to the currency exchange desk, and any cash that you have left over, they'll exchange it to whatever currency you prefer. Now let's go over lodging. There are several lodging options if you want to stay somewhere before you catch your bus to start your hike, or when you get done, if you want to stay somewhere in Reykjavik to explore. There is apparently a Reykjavik campsite, and I didn't really hone in on this option until after I got back home, but it costs about $21 US to camp there per night. One cool thing about the campsite is the Reykjavik excursions bus will pick you up at that spot, so you don't have to worry about taxiing to the bus station. There are some hostel options. One of them that I looked at is about $34 US per night, so that's a little bit more expensive, maybe not as convenient if you're gonna ride the bus, but that allows you to be out of the elements before you start your hike. And then there's the option of private lodging. One of the places that I stayed before I started my hike was the Reykjavik Peace Center. They have a lockbox at the front door that they give you the code once you make your reservation and everything to get in, and then another lockbox with the key to your room, etc. So there's this self-check-in type thing where you can get a room. That cost me about $116 per night. And then of course they do have fancy hotels if you want to kick it up a notch from there. The reason I went with the private lodging option, the more budget-friendly one, not the fancy hotel, was because I didn't necessarily want the privacy so much, but I wanted to be able to plug in all of my electronics and let them charge before I started the trail, but I still wanted to be able to go explore while I was there in town and not have to babysit those things being plugged up. At a hostel, I would just not feel comfortable leaving an expensive camera plugged into the wall and heading out for the day. But if I didn't have all of that camera equipment to charge, then I would like the social aspect of hostels, because you might find other solo travelers who want to go out to eat with you or go sightseeing a lagoon or something like that, and that way you're not having to do that stuff by yourself. I don't really mind alone time though. I kind of value it. But knowing that I was going to be out on the trail alone, having the social time of spending time with other folks in town would have been fun. Now let's talk about luggage. I have a whole video on flying with backpacking gear, so I'm going to link to that video in the video description. That way this video doesn't end up being like 3 hours long on just how to travel to Iceland. But I will just alert you that flying with trekking poles can be kind of tricky. Sometimes it's a problem. People are like, nope, you can't do it. And sometimes folks have gotten through no problem. I never risk it because I don't want to give up my expensive trekking poles to TSA, so I put them in a checked bag. Also, fuel is an issue. If you're somebody who likes to cook on trail, you cannot fly with a fuel canister, even in a checked bag. So I will talk about where you can get fuel in Iceland in just a minute. But say you fly with some extra clothing and you've got your suitcase and some things like that. What do you do with those things when you're going to go out and hike the trail? Well, there are several options. You can potentially ask the place that you're lodging before and after your hike, if you're staying at the same place before and after, to hold your stuff. And a lot of those places will do that. I've done that when I was on a trip out in Wyoming at the Grand Tetons. They had a luggage hold for free. There are also luggage lockers at the BSI bus station and at some other places around town where you can do long-term luggage storage. And there's also one at the airport. So if it was something like your duffel bag only, not stuff that you needed for the trip and while you were in Iceland, then you could just leave it there and pick it back up when you go to fly home. This is another reason why I really appreciated having the rental car, because I was able to leave all of my extra town clothes and my suitcase in the car while I was backpacking. There is one other option that I should mention. I guess you can do a mixture of all of these things if you want to, but you can always look at mailing things home. I'm not sure how much that would cost. It might be cheaper to just rent the luggage locker. They seemed pretty inexpensive, or pretty reasonable anyway, but you can weigh your options. And I guess if you were going to use whatever stuff, town clothes, etc., before your hike, then you could mail it home, and when you get done with your hike, you don't have to worry about it. As far as fuel goes, there are a few places that you can get it. The Mountain Mall, that bus that I was talking about at Landmannalaugar, did have fuel available when I was there, but I would not rely on that. I would use that as a last resort. The BSI bus station has a camp store where you can actually rent gear. They had some fuel canisters that were really bigger than what I wanted to carry, and they were not compatible with my BRS stove. The BRS stoves are not compatible with the Coleman fuel canisters you can get at Walmart, for example, so they can be a little iffy. Definitely check it before you're out on trail if it's a different brand fuel that you've never used before. But worst case scenario, that camp store at the BSI bus station did have gear for rent, so I could have rented a heavier stove if I needed to with their big fuel can. But somebody told me about a store called Everest in Reykjavik, so I just stopped by there, and they had a pretty good selection of different backpacking stuff, and I always like checking out backpacking stores. I thought it was especially cool to do so in another country, but that's where I ended up getting the fuel that I used on the Laugavegur Trail. I'm gonna put the gear list of everything that I took with me to Iceland in the video description. I'll do a ladder packs list, but just some things that I want to highlight that you may want to have, or that I appreciated having. First, rain gear. A rain jacket and rain pants. Even if it's not raining, chances are you're gonna deal with some wind, and that helps cut the wind. Most of the people I saw had more heavyweight rain gear than what I was carrying. I had my Enlightened Equipment women's Visp rain jacket and some anti-gravity gear pants, but they worked just fine for me because I also had a base layer to hike in. That's the next thing on the list, having a warm base layer to hike in. Not only did I have a long sleeve shirt, but I also had a fleece pullover type thing, and then I hiked in leggings. Some people like to take extra shoes for water crossings. You don't have so many water crossings that it would be too annoying to sit down, change shoes, etc. But for myself, I didn't want the extra weight, and I don't have tender feet, even though these were pretty gnarly rocks in the creeks. So I would have either just trudged through in my trail runners, but it was kind of cold, and like I said, my feet are pretty tough, so I just kicked off my shoes and socks and went across barefooted. But just a warning, there are a lot of people who do like to take water shoes or some shoe that they can cross a creek in. I don't typically hike with a beanie and a buff, but for this trail, again, with how cold it was even in the summertime, I was really grateful to have a nice wool beanie that I picked up at the BSI bus station and a buff from the camp store at that BSI bus station. I definitely appreciated having hand warmers. I carried enough to have at least a pack of 2 each night with me on trail. There are trash cans along the way at some of the huts, so you do get to ditch your trash at some point. So having something like that I was going to use and then still have that heavy weight, it was nice knowing I could actually toss it along the way. On this trip, I also made sure to have my possum down gloves and my Showa Timorous rain gloves that Andrew Skirker reviewed. He's how I found out about those gloves, but again, I'll put all of this stuff in the lighter packs list. I wore trail runners while I was out in Iceland, and even with it being really rocky terrain, they worked just fine. And I know a lot of y'all asked, what are those bright yellow shoes you're wearing? Those are Topo Athletic Run Venture 4s, and I really like them. They are a zero drop trail runner that has a pretty wide toe box and some bright colors, which I really liked. I mean, that way if I were to get lost, I could just hold my feet up in the air and people would find me. But yeah, all joking aside, I'll end up doing a full-on review of the Topo Athletic Run Venture 4s, but I'm a fan. If you're aiming to take a shower at one of the huts, you may want to carry a camp towel type thing or a designated bandana for drying off. I didn't do that, and in hindsight, I didn't really long for it. I mean, it would have been nice, but I didn't want to add that extra weight. So I just used a bandana that I had to wrap around a camera to kind of help protect it, and I made sure it dried out well before I put it back on the camera. But if you're opposed to using just a bandana or a dirty shirt or something like that, then you might want a camp towel. And finally, most people who want the most comfort and warmth on this trek would recommend having a 4-season freestanding tent. I made a whole video about how the Duplex L performed in the Icelandic weather, so I will link to that in the video description as well. I would carry that again going forward, but certainly understand why people prefer the freestanding 4-season tent. And anytime I'm hiking in cold, damp weather, I always make sure that I have a couple extra pair of socks. So I think on this trip I had 4 different pair with me, and I did not regret that at all. Now let's talk about cell service. I have Verizon Wireless, and they offer a travel pass program. It's just $10 a day for unlimited calling, and you get 2 gigabytes of data before they start charging you like an arm and a leg for extra data. But for the amount of time I was going to be there, it just seemed like the easiest way to go, and I had already set it up when I did the Camino with my sister in 2019. So basically after you set it up, you just start using your phone as normal. Well, when I landed at the Reykjavik airport, I didn't have any cell service, and I thought, well, maybe this is just out in the boonies, and as I get closer to town, it'll get better. It did not get better. And so I decided, okay, I'm just gonna get a SIM card for over here. That way I should have better service. And it was a world of difference. So if you're planning to do something like the travel pass in Iceland, if you have a different carrier, you can check to see if they have better coverage. But for Verizon users, it's basically non-existent. There are some cell phone stores in Reykjavik that sell SIM cards, but unfortunately when I got there it was Sunday and they were all closed for the day, so I had to turn it back around and go back to the airport because there in the little convenience store they do sell SIM cards. I read an article that talked about which SIM card brand would have the best coverage for Iceland, so I went with that brand that was recommended, and it's SIMIN, S-I-M-I-N-N. It worked very well. I had service most of the Laugavegur Trail, and it was very easy to add minutes for calls and data through the app that you can get on your phone. I'll link to that article in the video description if you want to read about it for yourself. They also have eSIM cards, but I think that really just covers data, and I wanted to be able to make phone calls just in case. There were several times in Iceland where I needed to call a business or try to book something, so it was convenient having those minutes to make phone calls. Keep in mind, if you are coming from the EU, you don't have to worry about getting a SIM card and your phone will work just fine in Iceland. So now let's talk about some extracurriculars. I didn't get to do a whole lot of exploring outside of the Laugavegur and the F Trail and going to see the volcano, but those were awesome as it was. But I did know that for sure I had to go to a lagoon because it's Iceland and that's what you do. I do have a lot of things that I still want to do when I go back, but traveling's like peeling an onion, so I got that first layer off, and next time I'll do and see a little bit more. The only lagoon that I can personally speak for is Sky Lagoon because that's the only one I visited. I wanted to also go to Blue Lagoon, but it was booked up. I think that one stays booked out for a ways. So if you're interested in going to Blue Lagoon, as soon as you make your travel plans, I'd go on and schedule that too. Sky Lagoon, although man-made, is absolutely incredible. One of my favorite things was you don't have to go outside to get into the lagoon. So you actually enter from indoors and then walk around. So even if it's rainy and gross outside, you don't have to like suffer at all. And even the bar where you can go up and buy drinks is right there in the water. It's just an amazing experience. I highly recommend, if you're gonna go do something like Sky Lagoon, or go to Sky Lagoon in particular, the 7-step ritual. Now, I'm pretty convinced that Icelandic folks just like to torture themselves, because I don't understand why you would go from being perfectly warm to freezing cold. But you take a hot shower, you go into the thermal pool, and then you do a cold plunge. Next, you're in a heated sauna room, you get all warm and toasty again, and then they throw you into a cold mist room. Finally, you lather up with some oily scrub, and then go into the hot bathroom, and then finish it all up with a hot shower and back into the thermal pool. Now, I hate being cold, but after I got done with the 7-step ritual, I felt so good. My feet were all tingly. It was amazing. So definitely recommend it. It would make more sense to do this after a long hike, but I did it before because that's just the way the cards fell in my planning and everything. But I mean, if you really wanted to do it up, you could do it before and after. The prices for the Sky Lagoon, even with the 7-step ritual, were pretty reasonable. I assume Blue Lagoon would be a bit more pricey, but I still want to knock that off the list one day. So how much time did I end up spending in Iceland, and what did it end up costing me? I had 2 days of travel, so the flight to Iceland and the flight back home. I set aside 1 day to settle in and get the chores done. And then I had 2 days of exploration. One of those was spent going to the Sky Lagoon and one going to the volcano. And then my 4 days on the Laugavegur Trail and 2 days on the F Trail. So that totaled my trip out to an 11-day trip. As far as expenses go, keep in mind that the price that I spent for this trip could definitely be higher if you wanted to get fancier and more luxurious, or it can certainly be lower if you go with the camping option in town instead of private lodging. Also, if you don't rent a car, that could definitely save you a chunk of change if you're not taxiing to excess. But just to give you an idea, this was my expense breakdown. For my flights, it was about $1,000 with my bag and all. And then lodging for off-trail, I had 4 nights in town that cost $475. My on-trail, 2 nights of camping, 1 night in the fancy tent, and then 2 nights in the huts, totaled up to $165. The bus for the hiker pass was $105, and then for my rental car and gas, I spent approximately $1,500. My SIM card with refills was approximately $100. The guidebook that I mentioned was $26, and then my trip to Sky Lagoon with the 7-step ritual totaled out to $72. So the grand total for all of these items and my trip to Iceland was $3,443. But you can see how that rental car was almost half the cost of the entire trip. But again, this doesn't have to be what it costs you if you make different decisions on transportation, lodging, etc. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today. If you've got any questions about the details of my trip to Iceland, or you feel like I left something out, or if you have experience with traveling to Iceland and you've got some tips and tricks, please feel free to share that, because that could definitely be useful to anybody who's interested in going to Iceland, myself included, because it's definitely someplace that I want to go back and visit again. Thank y'all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you go, and we will see y'all next time.